12 species laughed at the skull that day. Daniel Webb did not. He stood at the back of the crowd in the Grand Archive of Tellera, watching aliens of every shape and color point their recording devices at the centerpiece of the new exhibition. The skull floated in an anti-gravity field, rotating slowly so everyone could see it from all angles. Purple lights made it look dramatic. Scary, like something from a horror show. The plaque beneath it read, "Skull of Emperor Valeth the Conqueror, last ruler of the Draven Empire, defeated by the Galactic Consortium 800 years ago. His empire spanned 12 systems before justice was delivered." A group of Kalori traders made jokes about the skull's large eye sockets. A family of Vorix took pictures with it, their children making silly faces. Everyone treated it like entertainment, like visiting a zoo. Daniel was a human archaeologist, one of the few working for the consortium. His job was small. He cataloged minor artifacts and wrote reports nobody read. The aliens who hired him thought humans were useful for simple tasks. Nothing more. But Daniel had spent his whole life studying the dead. He knew bones. He knew what they could tell you about a life lived long ago. That he stepped closer to the display, ignoring the crowds pushing past him. His eyes moved across the skull with professional attention, and he saw things, old fractures along the temple. Healed, but visible if you knew where to look. Someone had hit this person in the head, probably more than once, years before death, marks around the eye sockets. Faint grooves that suggested the Emperor had worn corrective lenses. He had bad eyesight. The teeth showed strange patterns. Not from normal eating, from medication, perhaps, or from grinding them during long periods of pain. This was not just a conqueror. This was a person who had suffered, who had struggled, who had lived a full and difficult life before becoming a display piece for tourists to mock. Daniel felt something cold settle in his stomach. Then he saw her. A small child stood near the edge of the crowd. She was Draven. Daniel recognized the species from his studies. They were rare now, almost extinct. Her scales were pale blue, and her large eyes were filled with tears. She stared at the skull like she was looking at a grave. An older Draven, probably her guardian, noticed Daniel watching. Fear crossed the adult's face. She grabbed the child's hand and pulled her away quickly, disappearing into the crowd. But Daniel had seen enough. The shame on the guardian's face. The grief in the child's eyes. This was an ancient history to them. This was personal. He turned back to the skull. "What really happened to you?" he whispered. That night, Daniel used his archive access to search for information about the Draven War. The official records told a simple story. Emperor Valeth was a tyrant who attacked peaceful consortium worlds. The consortium defended itself and won. The Draven Empire fell. Justice was served, but official records, Daniel knew, were written by winners. He dug deeper. He searched for original sources, first-hand accounts, anything from the time of the war itself. Most files were restricted, sealed by consortium authority, not available to junior consultants. That only made Daniel more curious. That he found one small file that had been overlooked. A report from a human historian who had visited Draven space shortly after the war ended. Just a few paragraphs, but they told a different story. The Draven did not start this war. The historian had written, they refused to surrender their sacred burial grounds for mining operations. The consortium wanted their resources. The Draven wanted to honor their dead. This was a war of greed against grief. Daniel read those words 3 times. The next morning, he submitted a request to access the restricted Draven archives. He expected to be ignored. Instead, he received a message within the hour. Your request has been denied. Further inquiries into Draven historical materials are not permitted. This matter is closed. The message was unsigned. Daniel sat at his desk for a long time, thinking. In his experience, people only hid things when they had something to hide. He thought about the skull, floating in its pretty lights while strangers laughed at it. He thought about the little girl, crying for an emperor who died 800 years before she was born. He thought about the message telling him to stop asking questions. Daniel Webb was not a brave man. He was not a soldier or a spy. He was just an archaeologist who spent his days with bones and broken pottery. But he was also human. And humans, he had learned, had a hard time letting things go. He opened his computer and began searching for another way into those archives. The consortium thought they had buried the truth about Emperor Valeth. They were about to learn that humans were very good at digging things up. 3 weeks of searching had given Daniel dark circles under his eyes and a growing list of dead ends. Every path led to locked doors. Every file he needed was restricted. The consortium had buried the truth about the Draven War deep, and they wanted it to stay buried. But Daniel had made one friend in his years of the Grand Archive. Her name was Scylla. Scylla was a Peloran, one of the aquatic species known for their love of records and their strict neutrality in galactic politics. She worked in the deep archives, organizing files that nobody had looked at in centuries. She was quiet, careful, and she noticed everything. Daniel found her in her usual spot, surrounded by floating data screens in a temperature-controlled room that smelled like salt water. "You look terrible," Scylla said. Her voice bubbled slightly, a trait of her species. "I need your help." The Draven files. It was not a question. "I wondered when you would ask." Daniel sat down across from her. "You know about them?" Scylla's large eyes blinked slowly. "I have worked in these archives for 60 years, Daniel. I know what we have. I also know what we hide." She paused. "The Draven records are wrong. I have known this for a long time. But I am Peloran. We do not interfere. We only preserve. I'm not asking you to interfere. I'm asking you to let me see the truth." Scylla was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached in her desk and pulled out a small access chip. Level 7, the untranslated section. The consortium never bothered to study these files because they thought the Draven were finished, extinct, and unimportant. Daniel took the chip. "Thank you. Be careful, Daniel. Humans are curious creatures. Sometimes curiosity has consequences." Level 7 was cold and dark. The files here had not been opened in centuries. Daniel moved through rows of ancient data storage units, searching for the Draven section. He found it in a forgotten corner. Thousands of files, all in the original Draven language. No translations, no summaries. The consortium had simply dumped them here and forgotten about them. Daniel connected his portable translator, a human design system that was better than anything the consortium used. Humans were good with languages. They had to be. They had spent thousands of years talking to each other in different tongues. The first file was a military transmission. Daniel expected battle orders, attack coordinates, war plans. Instead, he found a plea. "To all Draven colonies, the consortium fleet has entered our space. They demand access to the sacred grounds of our ancestors. We have refused. We cannot surrender the bones of our fathers and mothers to their mining machines. They call us enemies now. Protect your families. Flee if you must. We will hold them as long as we can." Daniel read more files. They were not the words of conquerors. They were the words of defenders. Evacuation orders for children. Prayers for the dying. Messages between families separated by war. One transmission made Daniel stop breathing. That IT was from Emperor Valeth himself, sent in the final days of the war. "My people, I have failed you. The consortium is too strong. Our colonies have fallen one by one. But I want you to know the truth. We did not start this war. We only wanted to protect our sacred dead. They wanted our resources. They will call us villains in their history books. They will make me a monster. Do not believe them. Remember who we really were. Remember that we fought for our ancestors. Remember that we loved." Daniel sat in the dark archive, tears running down his face. The 12 systems that Valeth had supposedly attacked were his own colony worlds. He was not a conqueror. He was a king trying to save his people from extinction. And he had failed. The consortium had not defeated an empire of evil. They had crushed a small civilization that refused to let them dig up their ancestors' graves. Daniel copied every file he could find onto his personal device. He worked for hours, knowing he was breaking a dozen laws. He did not care. When he finally emerged from level 7, Scylla was waiting for him. "You found it," she said. "Everything. The whole truth." Scylla nodded sadly. "I thought so. Daniel, I need to warn you. Your access to level 7 triggered an alert. Someone knows you were there." Before Daniel could respond, his communicator buzzed. An anonymous message. "Stop looking. This is your only warning. Daniel looked at Scylla. She looked back at him with something that might have been respect. What will you do? She asked. Daniel thought about the skull, spinning in its pretty lights. He thought about the little Draven girl, crying for an ancestor she never knew. He thought about Emperor Valeth, sending his final message to a people who would be scattered across the galaxy. The truth does not stay buried forever, Daniel said. Humans have a saying. The truth always comes out. His communicator buzzed again. A different message this time. Unknown sender. Just coordinates and 3 words. Come alone. Tonight. Daniel saved the message and looked at Scylla. I think someone else wants the truth to come out too. The station at the coordinates was old and forgotten. It drifted in neutral space, far from any trade routes. The kind of place where people went when they did not want to be found. Daniel docked his small shuttle and stepped into darkness. You came alone. Good. The voice was ancient and dry, like leaves crumbling in autumn. Daniel turned and saw a Draven emerge from the shadows. But this was not like any Draven he had seen before. This one was old beyond imagining. His scales had faded to almost white. His back was bent. His eyes held 800 years of sorrow. My name is Morin, the old Draven said. They call me old grandfather now. I am one of the last who remembers. Remembers what? The truth. Morin gestured for Daniel to follow him. You have been asking questions, human. Dangerous questions. I have been watching you. I needed to know if you were sincere. They walked through the abandoned station until they reached a small room filled with old objects. Draven artifacts, paintings, sculptures, items that should have been in a museum but were instead hidden here in the dark. These are the last treasures of my people, Morin said. Everything else was taken or destroyed. The consortium left us nothing but shame. Daniel sat down across from the ancient Draven. Tell me what really happened. Morin closed his eyes. When he spoke, his voice was the voice of history itself. Emperor Valeth did not die in battle. That is a lie. He surrendered. Daniel leaned forward. Surrendered? When the war was lost, when all our colonies had fallen, Valeth made a choice. He offered himself to the consortium, his life for the safety of the survivors. He believed they would honor the agreement. Morin's hands trembled. They did not honor it. They took him. They tortured him. For weeks, they broke his body and his mind. They wanted the locations of our hidden refugee colonies, the places where our children were hiding. Daniel felt sick. The fractures on his skull. Yes, they beat him. Again and again. They wanted him to betray his people. Morin opened his eyes, and they were wet with ancient tears. He did not break. For weeks of pain, he never told them where our children were hiding. He died protecting secrets he could have traded for an end to his suffering. But the skull shows healed fractures. Some of those injuries were old. Morin nodded slowly. Valeth was never a strong man. He was sick most of his life. Weak bones. Poor eyesight. He became emperor not because he was a warrior, but because he was wise and kind. When the consortium came for our sacred grounds, every advisor told him to surrender, to let them dig up our ancestors, to save our lives. But he refused. He said that a people who surrender their dead have already surrendered their souls. He knew we could not win. He fought anyway, not for victory, for honor. Daniel sat in silence, processing everything he had learned. The emperor the galaxy mocked as a tyrant was actually a sick, gentle king who died protecting children. After he died, Morin continued. The consortium announced they had extracted the colony locations. They were lying. They found some colonies through other means. Spies captured soldiers who were not as strong as their emperor. But many of us escaped because Valeth never broke. How many survived? Of billions, only a few thousand. We scattered across the galaxy. We hid. We were taught to feel shame for what our emperor had done. The consortium rewrote history. They made Valeth a monster so that no one would question what they did to us. Morin reached out and gripped Daniel's hand with surprising strength. For 800 years, we have lived in shame. Our children grow up believing their ancestors were evil. They see Valeth's skull in that museum, and they think he deserves his fate. Do you understand what that does to a people? To have your greatest hero turned into a joke. Daniel understood. He thought about human history. about conquerors who rewrote the stories of those they defeated, about the countless peoples who had been erased or mocked or forgotten. Why are you telling me this? Daniel asked. Because you're the first outsider who has ever looked at that skull and seen a person instead of trophy. You're the first who has asked what really happened. Morin released his hand. I am old, human. I will die soon. I cannot fight. My people cannot fight. We are too few, too broken, too afraid. What do you want from me? Morin's ancient eyes held a small flame of hope. I want nothing. I expect nothing. But I wonder. Humans are strange creatures. You feel things deeply. You get angry at injustice even when it is not your own. I have seen this in your species. Daniel stood up. He looked at the hidden treasures around him, the last remnants of a civilization that had been erased from history. I'm going to fix this, Daniel said. I do not know how yet, but I'm going to restore your emperor's honor. I'm going to tell the galaxy what really happened. Moon smiled sadly. The consortium will destroy you. Maybe. But where I come from, we have another saying. Some things are worth fighting for even if you cannot win. Daniel walked toward the door, then turned back. Your emperor knew that. That is why he fought. That is why he never broke. And that is why I am going to bring him home. They arrested Daniel the moment he returned to the Grand Archive. Four consortium security officers surrounded his shuttle. They put energy cuffs on his wrists. They read him a list of crimes that sounded very serious. Unauthorized access. Theft of restricted data, cultural agitation, sedition. Daniel did not resist. He just smiled. Something funny, human, one of the officers asked. I was wondering when you would come for me. They brought him before a tribunal of 7 senior consortium officials. The room was cold and formal. Daniel stood alone in the center while the officials looked down at him from raised seats. Daniel Webb, the lead official, said, You have accessed restricted archives. You have copied classified materials. You have met with enemies of the consortium. How do you plead? I plead that the truth matters. Silence. Daniel looked up at the tribunal. I request the right to speak. The officials exchanged glances. The right to speak was an old tradition. It was rarely granted, but refusing it would look bad. Granted, the lead official said reluctantly. Make it brief. Daniel did not make it brief that he told them about the skull, about what he had seen in its fractures and marks. He told them about the Draven War, about the sacred grounds, about a small civilization that refused to let invaders dig up their ancestors' bones. He told them about Emperor Valeth, a sick king with bad eyesight who fought a war he knew he would lose, a man who surrendered himself to protect his people, a prisoner who was tortured for weeks and never betrayed the children he had sworn to protect. He told them about the skull floating in pretty lights while tourists laughed at it, about a little Draven girl crying for a hero she had been taught was a monster. The tribunal listened in growing discomfort. The Draven were defeated, Daniel said. Their civilization was destroyed. Their history was rewritten. And now, 800 years later, their greatest hero spins in an anti-gravity field so strangers can take pictures with him. Is this who we are? Is this what the consortium stands for? The lead official's face was hard. The Draven were enemies. They were victims. And deep down, you know it. That is why you buried the truth. That is why you locked those files away. Because if the galaxy knew what really happened, they might start asking questions about other wars, other enemies, other skulls. What Daniel did not know was that Scylla had arranged for his speech to be broadcast. Across the galaxy, millions of beings watched a human stand alone before the most powerful government in existence and accuse them of lying. Within hours, messages began flooding consortium channels. The Kalori trade captain offered to shelter Daniel if he escaped. A Vorix warrior monk declared that Daniel had spoken with honor. A collective of human diplomats filed formal protests. Species who had lost their own wars, who had seen their own heroes humiliated, began speaking up. The tribunal received the reports with growing alarm. This is getting out of control, one official muttered. The lead official raised his hand for silence. Then he looked at Daniel with something that might have been respect or might have been hatred. We are prepared to offer you a deal, Mr. Webb. All charges dropped. Full pardon. You return to your position at the archive. In exchange, you stop this investigation. You never speak of the Draven matter again. You let this die. Daniel looked at the 7 most powerful beings in the consortium. Creatures who could destroy him with a word. No. Excuse me. I said no. Where I come from, we have a saying. Give me liberty or give me death. I would rather go to prison knowing the truth than live free in a lie. The lead official's face twisted with anger. Then you will rot in a cell until you change your mind. Take him away. The guards moved forward. They never reached Daniel. The doors burst open. Scylla rushed in, followed by the Kalori captain and the Vorix warrior who had responded to Daniel's broadcast. Behind them came a dozen more beings from different species. We claim this human under the ancient right of sanctuary, Scylla declared. He has spoken truth to power. We will protect him. The tribunal was in chaos. Guards did not know who to arrest. Officials shouted conflicting orders to end the confusion. Daniel felt strong hands pull him toward the door. Time to go, Captain Brill, the Kalori, said with a sharp-toothed grin. My ship is fast. Their security is slow. They ran through the archive, past stunned workers and confused visitors. Daniel's mind raced. Where are we going? Away from here, the Vorix warrior, Sister Yevane, answered. We will figure out the rest later. They reached Brill's ship just as alarms began to sound. The engines roared. The ship lifted off and shot toward open space. Daniel looked back at the Grand Archive, growing smaller behind them. Somewhere in there, an emperor's skull still spun in its pretty lights. We're going back for him, Daniel said quietly. Captain Brill laughed. The human wants to rob the most secure museum in the galaxy. I like it. Can it be done? Sister Yevane checked her weapons. Everything can be done. The only question is the price. Daniel thought about old Morin waiting in his hidden station, about the little Draven girl and her tears, about a king who died protecting children he would never meet. Whatever the price, Daniel said, it is worth paying. The ship jumped to light speed, leaving the consortium far behind. The hunt had just begun. Nobody had ever stolen from the Grand Archive. That was what made Daniel's plan so perfect. They gathered on a hidden station in deep space. Daniel, Scylla, Captain Brill, Sister Yevane, and one more, old Grandfather Morin, who had traveled from his hiding place to join them. You should not be here, Daniel told the ancient Draven. It is too dangerous. Morin smiled with what remained of his teeth. I am 400 years old. I have lived my entire life in hiding and shame. If there is even a small chance I can see my emperor's bones return to our sacred ground, I will take that chance. Daniel could not argue with that. They studied the archive security for days. The skull was kept behind energy shields that required 3 separate administrators to deactivate. Armed guards patrolled every hour. Scanners detected weapons and unauthorized technology. We cannot fight our way in, Sister Yevane said. Then we trick our way in, Daniel replied. His plan was simple and insane. The archive loved collecting rare artifacts. They especially wanted human artifacts, since humans were still relatively new to the galactic community. Daniel would create a fake treasure so valuable that the archive would host a special ceremony to receive it. What fake treasure? Brill asked. Daniel smiled. The original Declaration of Independence. The consortium has wanted it for years. They think it was destroyed in Earth's resource wars. We will tell them a private collector found it and wants to donate it. Scylla's eyes widened. Can you make a convincing fake? I'm an archaeologist. Making things look old is what I do. They worked for weeks. Daniel created a perfect replica using the right paper, the right ink, the right aging techniques. He invented a fake identity. A wealthy human collector who wanted recognition more than money. The archive believed it. They were too greedy not to dot on the day of the ceremony. Daniel walked into the Grand Archive as an honored guest. Brill came as his bodyguard. Scylla had returned to her old position, claiming she had been kidnapped and had escaped. Sister Yevane disguised herself as a maintenance worker. Old Morin stayed hidden on Brill's ship, watching through cameras they had placed inside. The ceremony was grand and boring. Officials made speeches about cultural preservation and galactic unity. Daniel smiled and nodded and waited. When a moment came to unveil the fake declaration, Daniel gave the signal. Every light in the archive went out. Scylla had triggered a cascade failure in the power systems. Backup generators kicked in, but they only powered essential systems. The energy shields around the exhibits dropped. In the darkness and confusion, Daniel ran. He knew the archive better than anyone. He had walked its halls for years, invisible and ignored. Now that invisibility worked in his favor. He reached the Fallen Empire's exhibition in seconds. The skull floated in darkness, no longer protected by shields. Daniel reached for it with trembling hands. His fingers touched the bone. Cold, ancient, the remains of a king who had died protecting children 800 years. 8GOAS. He lifted the skull. He noticed something. A mark at the base, hidden from normal view. Daniel tilted the skull and saw it clearly in the emergency lighting. Words, carved into the bone itself. 3 words in ancient Draven. Daniel did not speak Draven, but he recognized the characters from his research. He would translate them later. Right now, he had to run, but he almost made it. Alarms screamed. Guards rushed through the halls. Daniel ducked into a side corridor, clutching the skull to his chest. Stop there, human. 3 guards blocked his path. Energy weapons aimed at his heart. Then a voice crackled over every speaker in the archive. My name is Morin. I am the last elder of the Draven people. I am here to confess my crimes. Old Morin had activated a distress beacon on himself. He had surrendered to draw attention away from Daniel. The guards hesitated. New orders came through their communicators. A Draven terrorist was more important than a fleeing human. They ran past Daniel without a second look. Daniel reached the docking bay, where Brill waited with engines running. Sister Yevane was already aboard, having secured their escape route. Scylla joined them moments later, breathing hard. Where's Morin? Daniel demanded. Captured, Scylla said quietly. He planned this. He knew it was the only way to get you out. Through the ship's cameras, they saw old Morin being led away in energy cuffs. The ancient Draven looked up at the camera. He smiled. Then Brill's ship shot into space. Daniel sat in the cargo hold, holding the skull of Emperor Valeth. He remembered the words carved on the bone. He entered them into his translator. 3 words. A message hidden for 800 years. Protect my children. Daniel held the skull close and whispered, We will. Behind them, the consortium fleet was mobilizing. The largest manhunt in galactic history was beginning. Ahead of them, somewhere in deep space, the last free world of the Draven people waited. The race had begun. 50 warships chased them through the darkness between stars. The consortium had never sent a fleet this large for a single fugitive. Then again, no one had ever embarrassed them this badly before. Captain Brill's ship was fast, but it was not fast enough. They could see the fleet gaining on their sensors. Another few hours and they would be caught. We are not going to make it, Brill said grimly. Daniel looked at the skull cradled in his lap. After everything they had done, after all the sacrifices, they were going to fail. The Emperor would never reach his sacred ground. Unless. Open a channel, Daniel said. All frequencies. I want everyone in the galaxy to hear this. Scylla's fingers moved across the controls. You're on. Daniel spoke that he told the galaxy everything. The true history of the Draven War. The torture of Emperor Valeth. The genocide of his people. The skull that had been displayed as entertainment for 800 years. The message carved on its base. Protect my children, that he told them about old Morin, who had sacrificed his freedom so the truth could escape. About the little Draven girl crying in the museum. About what it meant to be a people whose greatest hero had been turned into a joke, that he told them that the consortium fleet was coming to stop him. To take back the skull. To bury the truth again. I do not know if anyone is listening, Daniel said. I do not know if anyone cares. But I believe that somewhere in this galaxy, there are beings who understand that how we treat the dead says everything about who we are. I believe there are beings who are tired of watching the powerful humiliate the defeated. I believe there are beings who will witness this moment and remember it. He ended the transmission. For a long time, nothing happened. Then, on the sensors, new contacts appeared, ships, dozens of them, then hundreds. coming from every direction: Kelori trading vessels, Vorix pilgrimage ships, human freighters, species that had lost their own wars, their own heroes, their own dignity. Species that had watched the powerful mock the defeated and said nothing. They were saying something now. The ships formed a wall between Daniel and the consortium fleet. Not attacking, just watching, just witnessing. The consortium fleet slowed. They cannot fire on us without firing on everyone, Sister Yevane said with grim satisfaction. Brill pushed his engines harder. The Draven homeworld was close now. A small planet, barely visible against the stars. The last free world of a scattered people. They broke through the atmosphere as the sun was rising. Below them, every surviving Draven had gathered. A few thousand beings, the last remnants of billions. They stood in the sacred grounds where their ancestors were buried. The same grounds the consortium had tried to take 800 years ago. The grounds Emperor Valeth had died to protect. Daniel walked down the ramp with the skull in his hands. The Draven watched him in silence. This human, this stranger, had risked everything for their dead. They did not have words for what they felt. He walked to the center of the gathering and knelt. Gently, carefully, he placed the skull on the ground. He protected you until the end, Daniel said. He asked us to do the same. The Draven wept, not with shame this time, with grief, with gratitude, with the release of 800 years of hidden sorrow. They buried their emperor in the sacred ground, beside his ancestors. They sang songs that had not been sung since the war ended. They mourned openly, without fear. Above them, the consortium fleet surrounded the planet. Warships blocked the sun. A voice crackled over every communicator. Surrender the humans and the traitors. Return the stolen property. You have 1 hour to comply. The galaxy held its breath. Then the Draven elder who had taken Morin's place stepped forward. Her voice was old but strong. The Emperor has come home. He is not property. He never was. And we will not surrender those who brought him to us. The hour passed. The fleet did not fire. They could have. They had the power to destroy the planet 10 times over. But the galaxy was watching. Ships from 50 species still hovered at the edge of the system, recording everything. The consortium could win this battle, but they would lose something far more important. The fleet withdrew. Daniel stood at the edge of the sacred ground as the warships vanished into the darkness. Sister Yevane joined him. They will come back, she said. Maybe, but not today. Today, the truth won. A small figure approached them. Daniel recognized her immediately. The little Draven girl from the museum. The one whose tears had started everything. She held out a small carved stone. A traditional Draven gift of gratitude. Why, she asked. Why did you help us when no one else would? Daniel knelt to her level. He thought about the question for a long moment. Because where I come from, we believe everyone deserves to be buried with honor. Even our enemies. Especially our enemies. How we treat the dead says everything about who we are. The girl looked at him with eyes too old for her young face. Then she hugged him. Daniel returned to Earth a month later. He was no longer an archaeologist. The consortium had made sure of that. But he did not mind. He had found a new purpose. On the Draven homeworld, they built a monument beside Valeth's grave. It showed a human hand reaching down to lift a skull. Not as a trophy, but as a gift being returned. The inscription read, "They saw what no one else did. They remembered when everyone else forgot." And across the galaxy, in museums and archives and private collections, other peoples began to ask questions about other skulls, other trophies, other truths that had been buried. Daniel Webb had not changed the galaxy alone, but he had shown what was possible when one person refused to look away from injustice. Sometimes that is enough.